Acts chapter 12, beginning in verse 21. On an appointed day, Herod, having put on his royal apparel, took his seat in the rostrum and began delivering an address to them. The people kept crying out, "The voice of a God and not of a man." And immediately an angel of the Lord struck him because he did not give God the glory, and he was eaten by worms and died. In 2 Timothy chapter 2, beginning in verse 1, "You then, my son, be strong in the grace that is in Christ Jesus, and the things you have heard me say in the presence of many witnesses, entrust to reliable people who will also be qualified to teach others." I welcome you to another episode of Ministry Matters That Matter. I'm at the location of the Lads to Leaders National Convention in Nashville. And usually each year I go to the Atlanta National Convention, the one in Nashville, and then in Colorado. I have worked with Lads to Leaders for many, many years, primarily as a speech coach and as a judge. I've also done some work with puppets along the way and a little bit with song leading, but most of my background has been in speech. So I guess the first thing I want to do is I just want to remind us as leaders of the importance of preparing the next generation. I want to really encourage us to think about what we are doing to train the next generation of leaders. Programs like Lads to Leaders are a great place to do it. There are a number of other programs. I think about churches that have little Timothy classes and little Tabitha classes. But I want to challenge you as an individual and as a congregation to be very intentional about training the next generation of leaders. I want you to think about not only programs that you have in your congregation, but I also want to challenge you to think about who you are mentoring personally. Think about some people in the congregation, some young men, some even older men who you think have some potential to be leaders, and make it your mission to try to be an influence in their lives. I think about Timothy, who did not grow up with a father of faith, and Paul stepped into that void and mentored Timothy, and others stepped into the void and mentored Timothy. And Timothy had a tremendous impact on the church because people like Paul invested in him. And they spent time together. They traveled together. They did mission trips together. Paul wrote him letters. So I want you to think about, is there somebody, or do you have a group of somebodies that you can really invest time in? I'm not talking about just a class or just something like a program like this where you can teach them how to lead singing or how to put a lesson together. But I'm talking about somebody that you can really live into their lives, that you can take them with you when you visit the hospital, that they can walk with you as you're preparing a lesson, that they can go with you when you visit the funeral home. I'm a big believer in ride-along mentoring. And what I mean by that is if you are involved or know anyone involved in law enforcement, they use ride-alongs quite frequently. And I think about one of my former students who said he became a law enforcement officer because he did a ride-along in the squad car back when he was in high school. And that experience influenced him to want to go into law enforcement. We need to open the veil and let some folks into our inner world and see how we do things and why we do things and mentor them. And that can be young people, it can be middle-aged, it can be older. I just want to challenge us to be intentional. As you think about 2 Timothy chapter 2, taking what has been passed on to us and passing it on to others. So I just want to encourage that and reinforce that. As I think about the stage behind me, they're going to give out some trophies and so forth. And what they're trying to do is encourage young people, to offer words of encouragement. Now, it wouldn't break my heart if they got rid of the trophies, but I understand what they're trying to do. I want us to think about what are we doing to encourage those who are branching out and who are trying new things. Because when someone tries a new experience, they try to lead singing for the first time, or they try to do a little lesson, or anytime they step out of their comfort zone, it's scary and it doesn't always go well. And I want us to think about the impact our words of encouragement can have on them. I just wanted to challenge us to be about the business of encouraging people. And when they need it the most is not when they're at their best, when they're getting their trophy. When they need it the most is when it doesn't go well. And if we will, on one hand, be intentional about training future leaders, on the other hand, we'll be intentional about offering words of encouragement. I think about John chapter 1 in verses 35 and following. You have several encounters between Jesus and men who would become some of his apostles. Folks like Andrew and Peter and Philip and Nathaniel. It's interesting that Andrew brings his brother Simon to Jesus, and Jesus says, basically, you're Simon, but from here on you're going to be Cephas, or Peter, you're going to be the rock. And so Jesus began to call him the rock. Jesus called him a rock when he really wasn't quite a rock yet. And the words of encouragement, the ability to see what someone can become. And so you think about those young people in the congregation. If you say, hey, you're going to be a great Bible class teacher someday, or I think you're going to be a great song leader, or you're going to be a preacher, I think you're going to be an elder one day. And the kind words, the words of encouragement, the envisioning of that young person as a leader for God can make a huge difference. And the things we say to people matter. And sometimes we don't even realize that we're saying discouraging things to people. So I want us to be careful. I want us to be intentional about making sure that for the Simons out there, we're saying, I believe you're going to be a rock. People will often live up to what you say to them, or they'll live down to it. If we talk down to them and make them feel less, then that's what they'll live down to. So I want to challenge us as a part of mentoring and training people and just helping people to become like Jesus. Offer words of encouragement. It doesn't have to be a trophy. It can just be a kind word, a great job, I'm proud of you. The other thing I want us to talk about is, I think about Acts chapter 12, where Herod got up there and he is in his robe. It was a silver robe, according to Josephus. It glistened in the sun. And the people said, that's not a man speaking. That's God. That's a God speaking. And Herod didn't correct them. And so God struck him. It says worms is what the text says in Acts chapter 12. Josephus tells us that he was writhing in agony for 5 days before he died. The problem was he let people glorify him instead of God and actually compared him to God. Now, probably the audience is not necessarily talking about the one true God. It may have been little g gods as existed in the pagan world. But the point is, he took praise that did not belong to him, praise that belonged to God. One of the things I'd like us to think about as ministers is that we don't do what we do for notice. We don't do what we do to be recognized on a stage. We don't do what we do to be bragged on. So we need to live that personally. What we do is not about us. And so we need to be very careful about when we preach and when we do things, people will brag on us. And sometimes even when we didn't do a great job, they'll brag on us because they're trying to encourage us. I often say the members feel contractually obligated to build us up. And so they'll often say, man, that was a great sermon when, well, maybe it might have been a mediocre one at best. And it's not that they're being dishonest. They're just trying to encourage us. But what can happen is that can all go to our heads. And I want to challenge us not to be arrogant, not to be prideful, not to do what we do for praise. And that every time someone tries to kind of glorify us, quickly turn the attention to God. That I'm just serving God. I'm grateful God lets me do this. We serve a great God. I love to talk about this great God. I just want to make sure that we do what we do for the right reasons, that we do it to honor God and not for praise and glory and attention. And also, as we work with young people, as we mentor others, I want us to instill in them that they do it for God's honor and glory and not for their own. So I'm grateful that there are programs that encourage young people to learn new things and honor them. It's wonderful. And I'm a big believer in programs like Lads to Leaders. I just want to challenge us as we work with young people to remind them that the one we want on the stage The one we really want to honor is God. And so let's live in such a way that He's the one that is always honored. He's the one on the stage. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Ministry Matters That Matter.